This is My Child Will Thrive, and I'm your host, Tara Hunkin, nutritional therapy practitioner, certified GAPS practitioner, restorative wellness practitioner, and mother. I'm thrilled to share with you the latest information, tips, resources, and tools to help you on the path to recovery for your child with ADHD, autism, sensory processing disorder, or learning disabilities. My own experiences with my daughter, combined with as much training as I can get my hands on, research I can dig into, and conferences I can attend, have helped me to develop systems and tools for parents like you who feel overwhelmed trying to help their children. So sit back as I share another great topic to help you on your journey. It's episode 6 of the My Child Will Thrive podcast, and here's what's coming up.
It's a different view of brain operation from, say, psychopharmacology, which is more chemical-based. We change your neurotransmitter.
A quick disclaimer before we get started. My Child Will Thrive is not a substitute for working with a qualified healthcare practitioner. The information provided on this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat your child. Please consult your healthcare practitioner before implementing any information or treatments that you have learned about on this podcast. There are many gifted, passionate, and knowledgeable practitioners with hundreds, if not thousands of hours of study and clinical experience available to help guide you. Part of our goal is to give you the knowledge and tools you need to effectively advocate for your child so that you don't blindly implement each new treatment that comes along. No one knows your child better than you. No one knows your child's history like you do or can better judge what is normal or abnormal for your child. The greatest success in recovery comes from the parent being informed and asking the right questions and making the best decisions for their child in coordination with a team of qualified practitioners in different areas of specialty. Now on with the show. I'm really excited today to have John Beckford with me. He is from the Balanced Brain Neurofeedback Training Center and is going to help us understand what neurofeedback is and how it can help our kids. So welcome, John.
Well, I'm so happy to be here. Delighted to be able to contribute to this community. It's you're doing a good thing, lady.
Well, thank you so much. I'm thrilled to have you here. You and I have chatted before, but I'd like everybody to understand how you came to be in the area of neurofeedback, what brought you to this field, and why you're so passionate about it.
Well, I spent the majority of my life in show business as a talent representative, dealing with probably the most dysregulated brains on the planet. So I was very comfortable with the wide range of possibilities on how people can operate their brain system. But my personal story began with my own daughter, my eldest. I have two, and my eldest, we noticed, was having some milestone difficulties. They weren't profound. It wasn't obvious. It wasn't like, oh my God, red flags, shooting stars and whatnot. It was just a subtle, gee, she doesn't really seem to be as connected with everything. I mean, perfectly delightful child, no real big struggles, but communication skills were of question. And I think the first person that we talked to thought perhaps she had some kind of a learning disability. So, something was going on. She was, how old was she? Probably 6 or 7 at this point. She was already in school, and the teachers were noticing in preschool and then in kindergarten. She doesn't quite connect in exactly the right way with the other kids, and doesn't quite get the material we're talking about in as timely a fashion as some of the others. And as I said, her early milestones, developmentally, were not off the charts. She spoke a little late, she walked a little late, but it wasn't, as I said, it wasn't red flag time. So we came to the kind of diagnosis party a bit late. In retrospect, obviously, I wish I'd had better information early on about what was going on with her, because I could have done interventions even earlier. So for your audience, if you're suspecting something, you're probably right. Check it out and be aggressive about pursuing the interventions that you think are valuable for you, because they will do you a world of good. Earlier is better. It's pretty much that simple. So as I said, I was in a wholly different business and very consumed with it. And I obviously our whole family our family resources and time and energy got devoted to finding out what was going on with this kid. I had then had another younger child, to which I continually apologize for the amount of time and resources that were absorbed by the elder. I'll pay for some therapy later in her life.
I think we all experienced that to some degree. So.
Exactly, and for all the parents out there, it's just part of the territory. If you've got a child with a struggle, you're going to spend an inordinate amount of time, and the other siblings are going to suffer. All you can do as a parent is apologize up front, and try to make it an understandable, and give them as much specific attention. Just a little sidebar, give them as much specific time and attention as you can when you can, so that they don't feel left out. But at any rate, she had these sort of undefined, I don't know what kind of struggles, and we took her to a number of developmental pediatricians and various specialists, and nobody could really put a real finger on. Maybe she has ADD, maybe she has auditory processing disorder, I think that was probably one of the early ones that we went after. A big shout out to Advanced Brain Technologies and the Listening Program, by the way. A wonderful intervention. Frankly, good for everybody. I've done it. I think it enhances brain activity across the board. But if you're suspecting your child has got some issues, again, that's an easy one to get into really early. Not a high price point, and a very effective intervention. Sidebar. So
there's lots of those. Lots of sidebars with our kids, so no worries.
Absolutely, and to all the parents, you're going to do 50 things, and and it's okay. You don't have to do them in any particular order. You don't have to do. I have my own opinion about mine, but you don't. When you add them in and how you add them in is less important than you do add them in. And bearing in mind, your child is not a science experiment. It really doesn't matter which one is the most advantageous. Just do them all as quickly and as powerfully as you can. The more information that a child can get as they develop is good. So whether it's occupational therapy or physical therapy or speech and language or social skills groups or whatever the thing might be, do them all, and don't worry about this one first, that one. Just if you can. I understand the economics of this. Do as many of them as you can as early as you can. So anyway, we're watching this child develop and struggle in school and kind of struggle socially. She's a charming kid, very engaging and aware in some regards, but didn't just quite understand how to reciprocate in social interactions, and didn't quite understand exactly what the teacher was saying unless it was repeated 2 or 3 times. So we found ourselves with a developmental pediatrician who sent us to UCLA, where she kind of fit the diagnosis criterion, and they were very kind and nice to us and said, listen, we're going to give you a diagnosis of autism. She kind of falls in that weird gray middle part where she doesn't have the 12 things you're supposed to have. She only has 7, but she's developmentally delayed to a certain extent. So we're going to give you this autism diagnosis because it'll get you services. We said, terrific. Okay. Again, a lot of people speaking to your parents, you get afraid of a diagnosis. Don't worry. Take whatever in school or in the medical community or wherever you are. A lot of people have a lot of fear around that. Oh, my kid is going to be labeled. You know what? You need services for your kid. If it requires them being labeled for something, it's not like this is going to go on your permanent record or, okay, and you still need your services for your child. So do what you need to do, and don't be afraid of some societal impression of your child. It doesn't matter. Take care of your kid. That's number one. So I didn't have any particular issues. You want to label my kid as that she has autism and it's going to get me services? I'm all on board. Yeah. So we then went to, here in California, we have a system called the Regional Center, which you had heard about through someone. It's like, oh, here's a state-funded, taxpayer-funded resource for interventions and support that you can go after. They did their own evaluation and gave her a diagnosis of PDD-NOS, which frankly for me kind of makes sense. She is pervasive. She's developmentally delayed, and we don't know why. Not otherwise specified. Great. Exactly. That was a very comfortable diagnosis for me. So between the two, between the services that we got, the services that we were able to go after, primarily the big one being the regional centers. Each state is different, unfortunately. But if you have that in your state, don't hesitate to get involved. They're terrific. There's a longer part to the story of where my daughter is right now that is also being supported by a regional center. But I'm losing my train of thought. So we started doing everything. We started doing speech and language. We did occupational therapy. We did physical therapy. We did fast forward. We did the listening program. We did a bunch of stuff. And then somebody at somewhere along the line told me about this thing called neurofeedback, and I'd never heard of it. I said, what is it? Well, you go and they do stuff to your brain and it makes your kid better. So, okay. So I'm all in. I'm all in. I'm in. Sounds good to me. The operative phrase being makes my kid better. Yeah. So I went and started to explore it, did a little internet searching, such as it was back in the day, and discovered that a lot of people have been doing this. This is not some unknown commodity. Neurofeedback's been around for 60 years. I mean, it's a really long-term, at least scientifically speaking, investigation into how to change brainwaves for better performance. It's a different view of brain operation from, say, psychopharmacology, which is more chemical based. Mm-hmm. We change your neurotransmitter values, and that's going to improve your brain function. Ours is electrical. It's the other side of the equation. The brain is a bioelectric organ. So you can approach it from either side. I have a lot of opinions about the pharmacological interventions, because during the time of our early work with my daughter, we did a lot of medications, and I'm embarrassed and mortified now in retrospect that I went down that road so easily. But that's the frame I'm grown up in. I mean, if 3 MDs in my family, it's like, yeah, doctors know everything, and you take drugs for stuff, and that's the way things work. And I went, okay. So we were in the midst of doing all of that. The real point of making a decision on trying something like neurofeedback was we were at a holiday function at her school. And she was on, I don't know, Lamictal and Risperdal and, a couple of antipsychotics. It was her behaviors. I should circle back. Her behaviors were never exhibited in school. They only were exhibited at home. Mm-hmm. Her frustration with or intolerance for life as it came at her was clearly very difficult for her to interpret and to respond to appropriately, like most kids. Yeah. And she was overwhelmed all the time and would act out violently sometimes. She'd throw things, she'd scratch, she'd bite. I mean, it was very tough. Never at school. The teachers were all like, what? They were flabbergasted that we would have these descriptions in meetings about our kids' behaviors, and we don't see any of that. So, gratefully, one of the psychologists somewhere along the line said, "Well, that's because she feels safe in your loving family, so she's willing to expose herself, emotionally." Okay, I didn't feel so comfortable as you're being punched, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I think that a number of the parents that have dealt with this with their kids, in particular the girls, it's very typical presentation is that they hold it all together at school. That's why they take so long to diagnose them typically as well, is they aren't the problem in the school setting in particular or in the daycare setting. So it gets missed for a really long time. So I think your story is very similar. Will resonate with a lot of parents, especially the ones of girls that have gone through this. So, and myself.
Yeah, exactly. And to that point, I guess, if you have a girl, be extra alert. Mm-hmm. I have genetic history in my family, which I didn't really resonate with me as my daughter was in her toddler years. And now that I think back about it, I see some family genetic patterns that I should have probably been more aware of. So something to think about again for parents. If you think about your brother, your cousin, whatever, think about your own family genetic history and see if there's something there. I think there certainly is a connection genetically speaking. But be more observant, especially about females, because you're right. They are much more able at an earlier age to manage their stuff. Boys are
Yeah.
a little more volatile. So we were at a holiday function, which was probably the seminal moment of deciding that we needed to do something different, where we were observing her and a bunch of kids singing songs, wearing little hats, whatever. And there's my daughter, interestingly enough, literally in the center of the field, with this blank expression on her face, just not participating, not singing, not, to my way of looking, not really aware of what was going on. So, my wife and I were like, okay, whatever we're doing here, this isn't it. This cannot be her future, to be on these really potent medications, which, again, partly in retrospect, looking back, it's like, this is all off-label, non-dosage identified experiment on my child's body and brain. And I'm embarrassed to say I did it. And I would caution anybody as you're going into this area to be very aware of these medications and what they mean. I mean, Risperdal was touted as being the go-to medication for autism. It turned out to be a disaster. And that was probably the most difficult one for us to get her off, by the way. So if anybody's on Risperdal, be extremely careful. I think they're still prescribing it.
It is commonly prescribed still.
Yeah, and this stuff is off-label. They've never done a study on doses for children, ever. And most of these medications have very few, if any, long-term studies attached to them. So you are in an experimental phase giving your child medications, period, the end. And that may be comfortable for some. It was comfortable for us for a number of years until I started to say, the results here that I'm seeing are not acceptable. I cannot imagine this child going through the rest of her life acting and looking like this. So we looked around. Hey, I said, somebody had mentioned to us neurofeedback. I said, okay, let's go check it out. And, I sat and talked to some people and did my own research on it as best you can, and realized that here is a non-invasive, side effect free, as far as anybody can tell, attempt to, and I'll go through some of the different kinds of neurofeedback as we speak here, and there are different ones to look at. But generally speaking, a side effect free intervention that can help shape brainwave structures and patterns, and therefore your interaction with the universe. Oh, that's pretty appealing, especially the side effect free part. So we went and did a number of sessions with a provider in a different modality than I use, and we're pretty pleased, actually, with what had happened in a relatively short period of time. We're talking, 20 or 30, 40 sessions, something like that. And I should, again, for your community, make sure you understand that neurofeedback is a long-haul reality for kids on the spectrum. This is not a simple fix for your common sleep disorder or migraine problem. We view... I'm not sure where you want to get into the different kinds of neurofeedback right now.
Yeah.
Or you want to say that later?
No, whenever it makes sense for you, John. I mean, I think that a lot of parents don't, for those that have never even had an introduction to it, it'd be great to just hear on a top level what neurofeedback is and how it works, and then and talk about the different types of neurofeedback that are options for their kids.
Right. Well, I think probably the biggest and easiest dividing line that you need to look at as a parent is there are stimulatory techniques and non-stimulatory techniques. The stimulatory techniques are some kind of electrical, magnetic stimulation of the brain to provoke a response, to get the brain to engage with what has just happened. The brain is designed to do a couple of things really, really well. It's designed to it's a system, and it will react to anything that's done to it. So that's the thesis behind all of these interventions, is that the brain is very accommodating to taking in and utilizing information and trying to make some sense of it in some fashion, be it sight, sound, whatever. So it's very good at that. It recognizes patterns instantly. It's quite good at it. And patterns aren't always correct, by the way. It's why magic works. The magician will lead you down a road to a conclusion that is clearly he's put the rabbit somewhere else. So the brain is just trying to figure out what's going on. That's all. It's sitting there in the dark, floating around, trying to make sense of the stuff that comes in. And neurofeedback, so using a stimulatory technique, would put a tiny microcurrent, let's say, or some kind of a pulse magnetic force into the brain to provoke some kind of response and therefore a change. And then you see, well, what does that change result in? So by manipulation of various stimulations in various parts of the brain, you can promote a circuit connection that perhaps wasn't there. The same is true in the passive techniques. You present information to the brain for its own analysis. So in our technique, let's say, and this is true of a lot of the passive ones, you're presenting brain signals on some kind of a video or auditory platform. So a sound will change, a visual thing will change, something will flicker on screen, a rocket ship will go or not go. There's a lot of different ways to think about this, but it all comes back to the brain doing something to change itself to get a result that is witnessable. Mm-hmm. And that's the theory behind all of this. That the brain is adaptable, it is obviously flexible, it takes in an enormous amount of information, and then it tries to make something useful out of it for its own purposes. Our particular technique, I'm trying to think of where I should go into this. Mm-hmm. Our particular technique is a passive one, and ours is unique, the kind that I do. It's just called infra-low frequency training, or the Optimer method, named after the discoverers and promoters of this particular methodology. The Optimers, I must say, have been doing neurofeedback for 35 years, and by the way, have their own story. I digress 4 or 5 times in one sentence. They have their own personal story, as so many people do who do this kind of work, in that their son had epilepsy. Mm-hmm. And it was, life-shattering. He couldn't function at all. So they discovered this lady in Santa Monica, and she's doing something with brainwaves. Let's go see her and see if we can get our kid better from his epilepsy. And indeed, it worked. So that propelled them to change their lives, much like mine. They're both physicists, sadly enough, and went into the field of neurofeedback full-time, probably 35 years ago. Wow. So they developed this methodology that I used over the last dozen or so years, as they discovered clinically that the lower and lower they went in frequency, the more potent the response was for the patient, for the client. Mm-hmm. And didn't have any particular science behind it. It was just a clinical observation, as so much science is. It was like, oh, this is happening. I wonder what that's about. So after years of doing it that way, it serendipitously was validated by some fMRI research, which said, oh, there's networks in your brain that operate at these very, very low frequencies. And they interact with each other entirely for themselves. This has nothing to do with you and I speaking or perceiving anything. This is about how the brain conducts its own business inside its own environment. They're regulation networks, the primary one being the default mode network. And the default mode network, or also called the resting state network, which is probably a very it's a nice way to describe it, because it's the brain at rest. It's the idle chatter, not doing anything particular. And if that network is not modulated well, all kinds of higher, quote unquote, higher brain functions are going to be affected. It's the mm-hmm. core regulatory structure. It's just why I think we do so well with kids on the spectrum, is that those early developmental mechanisms, those mechanisms in early development have not come online as well as they should. Yeah. And so this is a communication. I mean, we view autism spectrum disorders as a communication problem. Mm-hmm. It's not that there's some vast deficit in a child's brain. It's that this part over here is not connected well to this part over here. So the mm-hmm. information flow isn't being properly aligned for analysis. So information will come in, sensations will come in, and if they're not processed properly, they're overwhelming, of course. If the brain can't pattern match these variety of sounds that are coming in, the kid's going to put his hand over his ear. It's too much. I can't listen to this. They're going to run away. There's a whole wide variety of responses, I suppose, that one could have. And you see it in kids with the spectrum all the time. That's the self-soothing strategies, the avoidance of stimuli. my own child, just to wash her hair was a nightmare.
Yeah.
Because she had the scalp sensitivity, which seems very, very common in spectrum disorder kids. It makes total sense when you think about it. It's like, well, something is just bugging me. Stop. I get it. So it's one of the challenges of neurofeedback is actually getting the sensors on kids' heads.
Yeah.
That's a big challenge because of that scalp hypersensitivity. So our particular technique addresses those low-frequency self-regulatory mechanism responses, which are developmentally delayed in kids on the spectrum.
Which makes a lot of sense in terms of where the kids, a lot of kids don't lose their primitive reflexes, which impedes the ability for the brain to develop appropriately. And therefore you end up with all these the end results there. So who typically is a good candidate for your style, the non-stimulatory approach that you take of neurofeedback?
Anybody.
That's fantastic.
I know, it's a terrible way to answer your question, but I mean, I truthfully, I believe that to be true.
Yeah.
And if neurofeedback were in every school, we wouldn't have half the issues we'd have. This is to use a slightly different frame, this is a technologically assisted mindfulness technique. It's a way to look inside self and modulate self. We wouldn't have the behavioral issues, the ADD, all of that stuff, whatever category, all the behavioral problems that schools are challenged with right now. If this were part of a program of early intervention, you wouldn't see half of that. Yeah. And you'd identify kids who are having internal communication issues, whatever label you want to call that. They would be ameliorated early on, and you'd see progress, rather quickly over time. And when I say quickly, I'm talking in months or years, not decades.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anybody who couldn't benefit, truthfully.
Yeah.
There are very few people born with the cognitive, structural skills of a 40-year Zen meditator. It takes work and practice. Ours is just probably the easiest way that I can envision doing it is through some kind of neurofeedback technique.
If someone's to come in and do the work that you're talking about, and as you said, the protocols are long-term, not overnight successes. If someone brings their child in, what types of outcomes can they expect with their child? I know it will be different based on their symptoms, but...
I mean, it's different for every kid, and the outcomes are different there are, as you know, there are so many variables in this conversation. Mm-hmm. If one's nutritional platform is not right, you will have less impact in any intervention you do. Mm-hmm. If your family psychological circumstances aren't handled well, if there's strife and stuff in the family, if the family is not doing well, that's going to affect outcomes. They're all interrelated. So you have to have reasonable expectations for everything. I mean, when a parent comes in, those are the kind of conversations I have. How is your family? What do you guys eat? Are you on some kind of regimen? Does this child get physical exercise? The obvious. It's like this isn't something that's mystical. Seems to be sometimes as I see kids come in here with their Happy Meals. And I just look at the parents going, you're not helping me here. You're making the job a lot harder. No disrespect to McDonald's. Maybe a little. Sorry, hope they're not a sponsor.
Not in this lifetime.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
So we're on the same page. So expectations that people can have over time. This is a incremental and cumulative training program. It's like learning the piano. It's like learning French. Like doing anything else that you want to think about in terms of your brain. Every session you do is a little bit. They add up over time. Yeah. More is better. If people can come every day, twice, great. Come 3 times a day. I mean, there's no downside to doing neurofeedback regularly and frequently. It will amplify the results. Kids on the spectrum can plan on spending a lot of time doing neurofeedback. It's not, as I said earlier on, one of the more simple conversations we have with people about their modest anxiety disorder issue or their sleep problems or their migraines. This is a developmental hierarchical reorganization of brain function. It takes a while. So I don't want anybody to have some expectation that there's some magic here. There isn't. It's a training program. The brain seeks information and seeks to do something useful with it, and does it, frankly, in its own way and time. The old saw, if you met one kid with autism, you've met one kid with autism. They're all different. They all have their own different challenges, and they all will progress and get better in their own time. Having said all that, one could expect over, let's say, a 6 to 9 month period to see some pretty remarkable gains. I have not had some of the really, really young kids like Sue Othamer has. She's dealt with kids as young as 2 weeks old doing neurofeedback brain training. If the child has vision, there's even a way to do it for people who are lacking vision. But if people have visual acuity, that's the sort of start point of when you can do neurofeedback. So it can be done really, really early on. But people will progress from nonverbal to verbal in a matter of weeks. Now, it's not, they're not going to be reading Shakespeare, but it's a profound difference from a child who is unable to communicate verbally to asking in the most basic of senses what they need: water, food, love, hug, whatever. That's a huge breakthrough for a lot of parents. They're actually communicating with their child. Their child is connecting with them and starting to make that progress. And it expands exponentially from there. Then you're talking sent phrases, then you're talking sentences, et cetera, et cetera. But you plan on spending a goodly, when I say 6 to 9 months, that's kind of the frame to say, okay, we're on this road. Now, where it ends, I don't know. My daughter, just to give people a frame, has probably done 300 or 400 sessions of neurofeedback, at least, maybe more. I've lost track. Which brings us to the economics of it. This is a very expensive intervention. Most clinics, mine included, especially for kids on the spectrum, have home training devices. So you'll do a certain amount of neurofeedback with somebody like me, then you'll take a machine home and you'll do this regularly in your own home. If possible. Some parents literally can't do it. It's just too challenging because economically, it's the only way it can be done. It's far too expensive to have me do it. So that's an option to ask any trainer that you might run across in whatever modality they're using. Is this possible to do this at home? Most will say yes.
And by doing it at home, it does reduce the cost of continuing on with the sessions, right?
Oh my goodness, yes.
So
I'm honest. It's one of the things that propelled me into this. I knew it was working, and I'm looking at my own finances, and I'm going, "Oh my God, I better go get trained to do this and do it myself." So, I went even farther than just renting a machine. I said, I really want to know about this because it was so intriguing. So I went and took the training with the Othamers and purchased the machinery and did the whole thing. But I'm not suggesting everybody should do that. They probably shouldn't.
Well,
but renting a home trainer is a good option.
No, there's plenty of parents out there that have changed careers as a result of what's happened with their children.
Really?
So including myself. So there's the lead in for that. So if a parent, when a parent first brings their child into your clinic, what are the steps you go through in terms of, obviously you said you sit down with them and talk about them about their lifestyle, diet and exercise and all those things. But beyond that, with the neurofeedback itself, what does it look like when you come into the office?
Even before that, usually my first conversation with people is, I'm not zapping your kid's brain. Let's start with that. I'm not manipulating this kid's brainwaves. I'm not changing who they are. They are who they are. It's in there someplace. We're just trying to promote the communication skills for that person to be able to unfold as a human being. So I try to assuage their faith. There's no electricity going into your kid's head. That's not my kind of technique. Ours is passive. We're just reading what's coming out. So you try to, because it's kind of weird. You walk in, you see this weird machinery and wires and stuff, and it's a little. I guess it could be a little scary. I've been doing it for so long, I've kind of lost that feeling. But I could see for a parent, it's got to be a little scary. And who am I? And why should I entrust my child's welfare to you? Who are you? Why do you do it? So I tell my story, and my story resonates with lots of people because it is so personal. And I saw the dramatic changes in my own child. that happened as a result of neurofeedback, and got her off all her medications, and she's, in school and doing well and has friends. I mean, it's like she has a real life. I mean, again, my child was pretty high functioning. It probably wouldn't be apparent and noticeable on first pass that she had some kind of an issue until you started to talk to her for a few minutes. But at any rate, it's got to be a kind of a scary thing to come into an office. But I'm very casual. I try, and I deal with kids all the time, so I relate to them pretty well, and we have a good time and all of that. So I try to assuage the parents' fears that they're doing something mystical and magical, because it really isn't. This is just a learning tool. We're reading brainwaves that are coming out, and we're putting them up on screen in some fashion. The best part about my particular technique is the kids get to watch cartoons or movies. It really doesn't matter what's up on screen for them. So it's very pleasant for the kid. It's very engaging. We got video games, rocket ships flying through tunnels, things that are very intriguing for young kids especially. But they can also watch SpongeBob or Bob the Builder, whatever. It doesn't matter. What happens on the screen is a flickering or shrinking of the screen, something obviously noticeable, but not the kid doesn't care. They're just watching SpongeBob. The fact that the screen is doing things is the important part for the brain to notice, because those are the patterns we're asking it to recognize. But the content is not important. So you can put anything up that you like, whatever you find pleasant and comfortable. So it's an easy experience for kids. The only challenging part is they have to sit still in a chair for 45 minutes, and that can be challenging. Surprisingly, a lot of kids who come in here, they'll do a session, and the parents will remark at the end of the first session, "My kid has never sat still for 45 minutes ever in his life." That's astonishing.
Yeah.
And all we're doing is we're taking advantage of the kid's natural desire to watch, Bob the Builder.
Yeah.
Or Thomas the Tank Engine, whatever the thing is that they enjoy. And I ask the parents, what does your kid like to watch? The only challenging kids I have found are kids who really aren't interested in visual content.
Yes.
Okay. Now we got our work cut out for us.
Yeah.
That's very few kids.
So while they're sitting there watching that, you're talking about the electrodes that are on the head. What does that exactly look like, and how many are you attaching, and how do you do that?
Our system attaches 4. Can I
No, they won't be able to see.
I can't
show you right now. It's not this time. Oh, I know.
Right,
so much easier if you can see. Yeah.
I'm going to get a handheld. Well, I actually am going to put up a video on my website about this, because it's constantly asked. All we're doing is we're sticking out with some very unpleasant sticky paste. It's the only bad part about neurofeedback, but it's an electroconductive paste. We stick these sensors on the child's head, which feed back to an amplifier, which amplifies. These are millions of a volt. These are tiny signals that leak through the skull. This is a traditional EEG reading. There's nothing magical going on here. They've been doing this for 75 years. We turn it into we take those patterns of change that the brain is registering with these sensors, and we turn it into something visual. Yeah, shrinking, growing, flickering. It's very obvious. It's not it's not something that wouldn't be noticeable to a person witnessing it. That's what we're looking for the brain to grab onto. What are the changes? What do they mean? It's a brain conversation.
And so it's that them seeing that is what affects the change.
Exactly right. It's the brain's engagement with its own signal. Interesting. It has nothing to do with thinking. Has nothing to do with me talking to anybody about anything. This is not a therapy. This is a training. There's no task associated with it, the kind that I do. Other forms have a task. We have to think about something in order to make the rocket ship fly faster, the Pac-Man eat up a power cube. Ours is entirely passive in that regard. So it doesn't require any activity in terms of, and that's a useful one for a lot of kids, because they don't want to do it. Yeah. So ours is just watch a movie. Yeah. I'm just tricking them into sitting in a chair by giving them something pleasant to look at while the brain interacts with itself. The brain is charged with understanding its own patterning and trying to make adjustments accordingly for better function. That's the job of the brain. It's designed to do that. And we're just giving it very salient, very powerful, in the moment information about what it's doing right now. Yeah. This is what you're doing. Do you want to change that? It's a question we're asking. We're not demanding it. We're not pushing it. We're saying, is this the optimal function that you perceive yourself to have? And the brain, of course, answers, well, no, look at all this. I'm jumping all over the place. I don't need to do that. That's a waste of energy.
Mm-hmm.
Let me modulate myself so that flickering stops, because it's kind of annoying.
Yeah. And so
it's a hard conversation because it gets anthropomorphic, and clearly the brain isn't, but it sort of is.
Is there something that visually, as you as the practitioner see in terms of the change and what is coming from the brain and is being displayed on the video over time as the kids get better?
I wish that were true.
Yeah. Make it easier, wouldn't it?
Everybody asks that question. The brain is different every day.
Yeah.
If the child hasn't slept well, the brain is going to perform differently. Mm-hmm. If he's had, too young for coffee, but some food item, I'll just leave it at that, that would stimulate their system, their brain will be reacting a little bit differently.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter to the machinery. Machinery will take in all sorts of levels of brain activity and present the same changes back in the same fashion it does every time. But there's no way currently to look over time to say, oh, that brainwave looks better than it did before. That's an improved brainwave. It really isn't about that. This is about these are about network circuitries that are inaccessible to us in a linear fashion. We're going to see the changes, like everything else, from behavior. Yeah, their calmness, their emotion, their reactivity, their sensitivity to physical stimuli, their social interactions. We're going to look at improvement. Those are the areas. If somebody's coming to my office, I will go down a very long list of what are the symptoms that you're observing that are troubling to you. And we'll have a long conversation about those symptoms. It helps me, number one, with protocol placement. But that's kind of the measuring technique of what we're seeing here, not the brain waves on any screen that I might see. It's the behaviors in their environment, not in my office, the behaviors out in the real world. Yeah. Which is why this feedback loop is so important. The more you give, the more often you can do this, the more information you give the brain to make self-adjustment, the more powerful response you're going to see.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's fascinating. So what do you recommend to parents in terms of if they are interested in looking into neurofeedback for their child? How do they find, other than obviously yourself? I'd love let us know where you can be found at, but how do they find a good and qualified practitioner that they can trust?
Well, I'm a big fan of my own product. So my number one place that I would go look is eeginfo.com. They have a search bar up there. Find a clinician. Tragically, it's kind of big city-ish at this point. If you live in a very rural area, you're going to find it really hard to find neurofeedback providers of any stripe with using any kind of modality. It's difficult. Yeah. But eeginfo.com is a great place to look. Just do a basic Google search, neurofeedback Cincinnati. See what comes up. You'll find, at this point, lots, I think, of providers, again, around any major metropolitan area. I can't speak to Canada. I don't know. The Signet, the ILF platform, which is called Signet. I mean, we're in 28 countries. I mean, it's a worldwide network. Just depends on where you live. But do your own research. And I think the biggest one is to get comfortable with what kind of procedure you're comfortable with. I personally would find it a little more difficult to do a stimulation technique. I'm not sure why. Probably because I saw Cuckoo's Nest when I grew up. So
not science-based, just a personal preference.
Well, it's just a personal preference. Exactly. No, the truth is all of neurofeedback works they work in different ways, but they all work. So it comes to what system do you feel comfortable with as a parent? What practitioner do you resonate with? If you meet 5 different neurofeedback people, pick the one you're most comfortable with. I mean, truthfully, it's less about the technique as much as I love mine, and I think it's the best. Everybody will say their technique is the best. So, and I'm honest about my own opinions about it. They all do work. Try everything, and if you try one and it doesn't work, try a different one. You know, if you try, lens, and lens isn't working for your kid, try something else.
Yeah.
If you try QEEG based and that's not working, try something else. Just go through the process. There's something here and something either your child will resonate with as being meaningful to their particular brain.
Yeah.
I mean, I think ours is a very holistic approach in terms of the way it approaches brain connectivity and hierarchical development of brain function. But that's not to say that you can't get, results from somebody else's. You can.
Yeah. So,
I hate
John,
to say it, I wish mine was the only one that worked.
But if someone would like to work with you, where is the best way to contact you? Where can they find more information?
Me personally,
about you?
well, I'm in Los Angeles, so if you're within 100 miles of me, no. I do have people come literally from far away. It kind of freaks me out sometimes. I go, "You're willing to drive from where?" Okay, this is LA, bear in mind. I'm in North Hollywood, California. I'm at thebalancedbrain.com. You can also find me through the EEG Info Reference Guide. But it's obviously my clientele is probably within 10 or 15 miles of my office. Mm-hmm. So for somebody outside that zone, there probably is another provider that you can find who may not be as good as me, but they'll be wonderfully qualified and very caring about the progress of your child.
Well, John, I really appreciate your time today, and it's really helpful to parents to listen to another parent who is very passionate about something that can really help all of our kids, and giving them this information so they can make the best decisions for their kids as they move along. Yeah. So thanks for all the great information today.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Good to see you. We'll talk soon.
So that's a wrap. Thanks for joining me this week on My Child Will Thrive. I'm so passionate about giving you the tools and information you need to help your child recover. And as they say, it takes a village, so join us in the My Child Will Thrive Village Facebook group, where you can meet like-minded parents and stay up to date on everything we have going on at My Child Will Thrive. This is Tara Hunkin, and I'll catch you on the next podcast or over at mychildwillthrive.com.